provides generous no strings attached grants to any citizen or citizen group with a viable idea. There is an acceptance that several might fail, but also that some could succeed and create impactful businesses of the future. The motion reads, this House prefers venture communism to private venture capitalism. Assuming all teams have the same motion, let's have the Prime Minister open the debate. And please do also type out your speaking preferences in the general chat box. So I only have for Leader of Opposition and Deputy Leader of Opposition here. Can I have for OG CGCO, please indicate your speaking preferences in the chat space. Sorry, I forgot about my panelists. So I have Ololade Edun with me on panel. Ololade, can you please unmute and let us know you're here and announce your presence?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ololade Edun from Nigeria. I'll be a panelist for this round. Good luck, everyone.
Amazing. And also, I think I have Nanjel here. Should have him here, right? My second panelist, Nanjel. Okay. Okay. All right. That's awesome. So you've texted them, and have they responded? No response. Don't you think you probably need to prompt cap to get a substitution? Or maybe like prompt cap and let's know if I'm supposed to proceed or not, considering that maybe this like a highly competitive room. Like, I mean, I don't mind at all, but I'm just saying. Okay, please. Okay, all right. So please confirm, just for the sake of the stakes of the rule. Yeah. So yeah. In the meantime, let me check if teams have indicated. So Azel and Supanan have indicated, DSM Ajaki have indicated, Luther and Nanaji have indicated. I think I'm left with Jonathan and Hassana. Can you please indicate your speaking order in the text space? Hassana, Jonathan, can you please do that for me?
Let me do that.
All right, thank you. Oh, well, have we also checked if Nanjal is not in the what's it called? The Discord. Which
here
room?
now. I've joined. Sorry.
You're here now. Is he here?
Yeah.
Nanjal.
Yeah, I'm here now.
Great. All right, awesome. All right, so guys, I think we are ready now. So let's just get started. Opening government, PM. Let's go. I'll be posting timestamps on the chat space. So.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Back again. All right. Give me a minute. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in. Yeah. If you have a POI, just unmute and say POI. Yeah. I'll take POIs even I'm old. Yeah. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. I think there needs to be a concession within today's debate, and I think this framing is very important, right? Notice how the way this benchmark necessarily looks at is that it means that the excess of the tax is what is necessarily used, right? So, for example, there is a budget of like maybe 100 USD or probably 1,000 USD in terms of education, right? When taxes are collected and like we have like above of that particular amount, we can then use this excess to be able to do these kinds of like things at the end of the day, right? Maybe and do things like say invest in businesses that people necessarily want to engage in within today's debate, which means that this particular action is something that is not self-inflicting, right? Because we're able to take care of other relevant state affairs that will most likely come up at the end of the day. I don't think that the debate in any term should like boil down to whether or not this tax funding would be a problem or not at the end of the day, right? And I think that's what all teams need to agree, which is very important for the debate to happen. But secondly, right, let's interrogate the nature of society and what it looks like. I think it's one that is highly capitalistic, right? It means that there are a lot of issues that people face, right, that doesn't necessarily allow them to maximize their agency. For example, things like, say, poverty, things like, say, your inability to access funding for a number of reasons. Could be lottery of birth or probably the kind of state you come from is underdeveloped or developing, all those kinds of things. But two, it's that most times states like startup or things like say entrepreneurship, it's harder to build up, right? So by the average individuals, right, it's very hard for you to build up startups that thrive, right? Or all those kinds of things. The reason why this is primarily true is because you have things like, say, huge monopolies existing that makes competition very high and toxic and pushes you out of the market, right? But two, you most likely have, say, private corporations that are more capital intensive and tend to select what kind of innovation gets funding or like like what kind of innovation gets funding, right? So most of their decisions are ones that are guided by profits, right, and not necessarily the social value of such innovation. But I think that thirdly is that capital is mostly controlled by private actors, right? Which means only the limited elite networks get access to the market at the end of the day. And I think that's something that's very, very crucial. But the second thing we're then going to interrogate is as to why states should invest in in this kind of action, right? But before then, I hear a clarification from I don't know who's the team, but yeah, future clarification.
Okay, so from CG, what you're saying is true. Competition would always exist, but then competition would always exist on your side too. It is unrealistic. Government can't give everyone the grants. People are still going to compete to get the grants.
Uh, you misconstrued. I'm not talking of competition. Like you misconstrued the whole idea of the competition. I'm not saying everybody is necessarily going to get the grant. I'm saying that what allows people to not necessarily go into the market to do things like young innovation is because of things like high competition in terms of, say, monopolies that exist. That's the kind of competition I'm talking about. But then let's engage why states should invest in this, right? One, I think primarily like just in terms of justification, right? It's one, people's taxes are an investment in states primarily, right? So when people do things like, say, give states the little they have, right? State tax individuals, right? But people often do things like, say, conform to state laws and all those kinds of things in exchange of states being able to protect their agency or give them certain benefits at the end of the day. We think that when people decisively do this, right, and take active decisions to conform to state laws and state policies, states should be able to cater to the vast majority of people in terms of like things like social contracts or whatever. But secondly, I think that this in itself is a corrective mechanism to correct who gets to innovate, right, and build a future within within the various markets that exist within society at the end of the day, right? And I think most times, right, what allows us to do is it allows us to give an open access to things like grants, right, and allows innovation to thrive in the vast majority of instances. And I think it's more important because now you have things like, say, local products being introduced more and people interact with these particular products and most importantly, people now have an incentive to innovate. Notice that currently within status quo, right, most societies, people are running away from innovation because there's a general idea that innovation is something that is necessarily very like the whole general idea that innovation is something that is not necessarily like big of a thing, right? It doesn't necessarily get you to the next big stage or probably increase you in terms of social capital at the end of the day, right? I think it's primarily like most times people are running away from those kinds of things, innovating, right? Because of the whole stress that is attached to it, right? I think the reason why this is primarily important is because one, it reduces the structural dependency on things like, say, Western ventures that exist, because the comparative is, say, private ventures that exist. So it looks like, say, different companies, or probably maybe international companies, giving these particular grants, or probably all those kinds of things that are more likely to extract profit from individuals or within states at the end of the day. But I think, which is something that is very, very bad. But I think the second idea is that innovation in itself, right, has to be like, there has to be a reward for a collective good, right? Not necessarily private property. And the analysis to this is to say, notice how most often times, right, there's an exploitation of people's labor and things like, say, private corporations neglecting workers' rights due to, say, the amounts of monopoly of power that they have to do these kinds of things, right? So, for example, you have things like, say, these corporations or these private ventures investing and owning majority stakes, right? Things like, say, patents and things like, say, the data that exists. The comparative that then exists within our side of the house, right, is that at the end of the day, governments necessarily fund this research, right? And it's on a large scale. It's like there's a public benefit and a global diffusion of this particular profit at the end of the day. And the most impact is that there's literally no strings attached to this, right? So even in most instances where in like different instances where these ventures or probably these businesses fail at the end of the day, there's literally no stakes at no stakes, or probably we don't have individuals pulling out or those kinds of things. Like public private ventures tend to threaten individuals because they're highly capitalistic at the end of the day, right? But I think that in terms of impact, that this aligns innovation with things like, say, equity, right? And things like humanity, because it's not just about private accumulation of innovation, right? It's about, say, giving individuals the ability to like have a collective good and also a reward system that rewards innovation at the end of the day. Because oftentimes the job market is something that is highly saturated, right? But most times innovation, okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
cool.
the time is up. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for the fine speech. Speakers are advised to probably be timing themselves or be watching the timestamp so that it's easier for you to. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that being said, let's please have the leader of opposition. Yeah.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yeah, you're very, very audible.
All right, let me set my timer and I can start. Where's my clock? Where's my clock? Okay. So I'm going to start my speech now. So I think, panel, this debate isn't about whether inequality exists or whether government should support citizens. It's about what systems systematically convert capital into real, sustainable innovation that uplifts society. On their side, the government becomes the sole investor. So it hands out no string attached grants funded by extra tax revenue, because that's the framing from opening government. And ours, private venture capital allocates risk through competition, accountability, and personal stakes. The metric for this debate is not good intentions, but systematic outcomes, right? Which world produces more efficient innovation, fairer opportunities, and sustainable progress? That's the world we are going to prove. Because the central problem is how to allocate limited resources to produce real innovation. Because as much as Prime Minister wants to outframe the whole idea, we think that capital is still limited. OG thinks that fairness means giving everyone capital. We say from our side that fairness and progress comes from using capital effectively so that good ideas grow, jobs are created, and society gain durable wealth. In their world, resources are scattered without discipline because they didn't prove that in their framing. In ours, they are concentrated toward viability. So the debate is about effectiveness and sustainability. It's not about generosity, right? Why do innovation systems fail in their world? We think that there's no accountability for losses. It's not that there's no accountability. Even if there's accountability, you already know how government accountability have a lot of loopholes. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when government funds every idea through grants, failure has no consequence. Neither do the bureaucrats nor the applicants, because at the end of the day, when I fail, who bears the cost? Government. But then there's information failure because bureaucratic selection lacks that decentralized feedback that private markets provide. So no one knows which ideas consumers value, yet decision must still be made. But then lastly, there's this incentive misalignment because they try to say that, oh, let's align incentives. We think politicians and civil servants face incentives to like look safe, right? They want that, but they would fund politically convenient projects and avoid controversy. That's one thing that we cannot escape from, right? That's one thing. So no bold decisions are actually taken. So they would actually take all the necessary bets, right? Private venture capital fixes these problems through competition, ownership, and feedback because each investor rakes their own capital, learns from the failure, and reallocates intelligence. So that is the structural difference that makes our side resilient and DS very fragile. I'll take a PY, but I'm coming. But let me do a proper characterization. We think that our world is like the world is funded by like public surplus. Yes, grants are no string attached, no repayments, no equity, no oversight, right? Even if there is, bureaucracies and all those stuff, right? It's not effective. Every citizen can apply. So where success is judged by bureaucratic and committees. That's where the problem is because corruption and nepotism will still exist. It's not like mutually exclusive that in our world, like if you are not well known in government, if you are not well known, you can't access these things because nepotism, corruption. Come on, you have to prove that. But then people who optimize for grant acquisition, not for product market fit, bureaucrats who favor politically safe populist project to avoid blaming and of itself. So to win, we are going to prove that we have to allocate capital more efficiently and productively, that we have to sustain entrepreneurship, ownership, and accountability, and we have to produce long-term social benefits without risking systematic waste. Before I move on to my first extension, Johnson, shoot.
The Lehman Brothers, who led to the greatest financial economic downturn within the world, were private capitalists who never had any government support, and there were strings attached, but they still collapsed the whole world. So that dichotomy cannot exist that because there's no strings attached.
Yes. So you can't also say that because like governments, we can also mention a lot of examples where governments funded people when they feel they collapse. That can't be the debate, right? What I'm saying, you have to open your ears and listen. First extension, incentives and accountability drive sustainable innovation. Why? Because one, we think that private VC is structured around risk-reward alignment, right? Because investors gain only if ventures succeed. So they rigorously screen ideas and mentor these founders. But then secondly, in venture communism, like capital is free and unconditional. So innovators face no real cost for their poor executions. That's one thing that they have to bite. Over time, that normalizes mediocrity and moral hazard. Why is this? Like, what's the mechanism here? Because you think that in our world, every dollar must justify itself through success in the market or through further investment rounds. So this creates a constant feedback loop. So in DS, the grant process ends accountability at disbursement. So bureaucrats measure success by money distributed, not impact created. OG says that this fund won't harm other institutions because it's financed from excess tax. Panel, that's fiscal illusion because the moment tax revenues dips, and as it will inevitably, these funds will compete with education and health budgets. Government always promising ring fencing and also fiscal pressures will force trade-offs. Even in the boom years, every act of carving out a surplus for grants will divert money from structural reforms or debt in itself. The reason why this argument is consequential is because innovation isn't just about funding, it's also about discipline. So systems that reward effort over entitlement evolve. Those that reward entitlement, like in their world, stagnate. Private VC, by linking success to reward, keeps the discipline alive, and that's why we prefer that word. But then they talk about social contract. But panel, social contract doesn't justify state gambling. Why? Because OG says that taxes are citizens' investment, so the state owes them the grants. That's a fundamental category error because the social contract obliges the state to provide universal goods, education, health, infrastructure that everyone benefits from, not risky individual business bets. The mechanism here is simple. When taxes are redirected into speculative grants, public money funds private risk without that collective return. So in private VC, risks are internalized. Investors bear it voluntarily. It's not like we are forcing them, they do it themselves. So in venture communism, taxpayers absorb it involuntarily. The reason why this argument is consequential is because once you redefine taxes as investment capital, you invite every citizen to expect beyond personal payouts. That destroys the legitimacy of taxation and politicizes fiscal policy. Private VC preserves a clear distinction. Public money builds that platform. Private money builds the business in itself. But then let's talk about expertise without ownership and how that will feel and how our world builds knowledge that lens. This is very important because OG claims that the state can, Jonathan will come in to say that the states can hire experts, right? Like, so the expertise alone doesn't create the innovation. Like, incentivized expertise will do that. But then consultants and analysts can evaluate ideas. But without these personal stakes, they are not like directly like associated with it, right? Their judgment doesn't improve with outcomes. But in private VC, investments learn through loss. In OG's world, the same bureaucrats reallocate next year's surplus regardless of the past performance. The mechanism is simple. So private VCs embed mentorship, networks, co-investment, not mere evaluation. So each success will reinforce expertise because investors are rewarded for being right and punished for being wrong. In venture communism in their world, experts are paid regardless of the results. So the only feedback they get is political criticism. This breaks risk aversion. So they would avoid controversial but promising ideas to protect their own careers. This is consequential in the debate because innovation thrives on bold informed risk. A structure that punishes risk aversion and rewards calculated risk consistently produce new industries. A structure that rewards caution breeds stagnation. I've never been proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Elo, for the fine speech. DPM.
All right. Can you confirm for me if I am audible?
Yes, sir. You are very audible.
All right. Thank you. It is well with our souls. Anyways, from the third or fourth minute, you can unmute and you can say POI. I'll take you from there. Sorry, let me get my recorder and record this terrible speech. But
Jonathan, you said that before. You never took the POI. What's the assurance that you take it this time?
Oh, I swear on the life of Cap that I'll take this POI.
Okay.
Anyways, yeah, so guys, POI third or fourth minute. Now I can hear everything from the background. So just say POI and I'll take it from there. Just a second, and I will begin on my next word. Okay. Starting. Oh. Okay, sorry. I can't record while I'm on Zoom. All right, no problem. I'll just continue regardless. I'll begin my speech then in 3, 2, and 1. There are a couple of things that we need to look at, especially being an economic motion. But to be very honest, this isn't very complex. The very first thing you get from opening opposition is the idea that accountability exists on the side of private venture capital, but doesn't exist on our side where the government is generally funding. I'm going to be looking at this in 2 levels. The first one is just look at the reality that exists. Countries like Rwanda, South Korea, where we have this general venture capital funded by the states that exist. There's a lot of accountability that exists within those spaces. But let's bring that into the debate world because I'm going to be arguing this on 2 levels. The structural accountability that exists and the normative accountability that exists. The first one has to do with the design within which the ones funded by the government is. I'm saying the one funded by the government because I'm struggling to remember the word. I actually have forgotten. I'm just going straight into this. What you need to understand here is that when you take the ones funded by the government, the transparency within that system is what assures the accountability. So for example, when it comes to the way in which the money is given, so every grant, the amount, the recipient, the purpose of that amount, all of those things are available open access through government portals. Anyone, for example, the media, the citizens, everybody can track funding, flow, outputs. Every little thing is open to everybody within the system. It means that the accountability within that space is built on the factual and idea that it's transparent within that particular design. But you see, let's look at the private venture capital. What generally happens is that you have a lot of contracts that are usually like things like non-disclosure agreements. They are things that protect investor confidentiality. And these things embed a unique web of transparency that isn't exposed to everybody, and there are huge demands that exist beyond the background. But secondly, on our side, you have recipients who are brought within public innovation communities. They show their progress, they share their outcomes, they review each other's projects. All of these things is horizontal accountability because it shows how a community in itself can self-regulate through visibility and contribution. But even beyond all of these things, there's some existence of a periodic public reporting where you can have some innovation reports that summarizes all the active projects that exist. And people like independent citizens, universities, these people can sit down and critique these things to get society to grow from there. So even within the build of accountability, there's progress and contributions to how we can further grow society. It's not just for these individuals who got the grants, people are also being able to get these things. But the second level of accountability that exists within our world is how there's that idea of being a collective stakeholder. Because the idea here is that we need individuals to feel a moral obligation to the nation. And it is better than a world where you have just a mere submission to investors. Because on our side, we see when the citizens know that their ideas are funded by public trust, not because there's some greed of private investors, they feel a moral duty to want to deliver value. The first framework I already gave you in how there's a unique reporting system, there's an accountability system, already tells you that that moral duty exists. It means that the social contract within that particular narrative becomes people feeling that people believe in me, I owe them that honesty. When you compare that to the private venture capital founders, they owe nothing to the citizens. All they owe these things to are the investors' profit motives. At least on our side, you get a greater niche and growth for the general community as opposed to a unique blend of private investors who are multinational institutions who take these monies out of the system. This tells you there's already accountability on our side. It should not under any level be undermined on any side in opposition. The second thing that they also try to clash against is the idea that what Hassana tells you about this being excess tax money doesn't make sense. Go back to the info slide. It literally says in economic terms that any tax above a certain benchmark. In economics, the reason why states put benchmarks on these taxes to fund venture capitals is simply because the amount of money states need to be able to run existing services like transport, education, healthcare, these things have to be met. And any money above that benchmark is what is funded into this private venture capitals and these funds. It's info slide, it's simple economics. If you don't understand it, I don't see why I should waste time on this. But the third thing they say is that, well, when there's a cost, then the institutions or the citizens are the ones who are bearing the cost to these things. It's very counterintuitive to every principle on which states operate. Because to be very honest, once you join a state or even you join a state at your birth, that you understand that communal growth and economic growth comes from ceding your rights to communal progress. And especially when we have shown in Hassan's speech that these specific things that are brought within the table and are championed by people ensure communal progress, we think we win on those levels. But you see, let me just make this debate even more fairer, because I think a lot of the things Hassana says is not understood or probably misunderstood. First of all, we agree that the state is less scrutinizing. We agree that the state is, let me just take the POI before I forget, shoot.
All right, sure. So the issue with your speech and your world in general is that necessarily in status quo, even without venture capitalism, if the state determines an area to be important enough, they can invest in it directly, bypassing a lot of the excesses of your system. Why is your world preferable?
My burden is not to defend all the things states can invest in when they think it's viable. My burden is to defend this general venture capital. That's what I'm doing. If states want to invest outside, it's their business. We agree in this narrative, panel understand, that on our side, the state is less scrutinizing. The less scrutinizing doesn't mean accountability systems don't exist. The reason why that makes sense on our side is when Hassana tells you that states are not overly poking their noses to influence the decisions of these individuals that receive the grants. But our answer to that concession even is that that is exactly why it's better for innovation and justice. Because when you look at the private venture capitals, their scrutiny is not objective. It's coded within profit bias, network preference. It means that on their side, they don't fund the best ideas, to be very honest. What they fund is the safest ideas. It means that on our side, where you have a less rigorous state system, you have broader participation, you have rural innovators, women, low-income inventors, unconditional thinkers. All these people are naturally locked out in the world of OO. And you see, look at Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria. Look at all the tech startups. Tell me where they are built. All of them are in urban centers. The reason is simply because all those people outside those narratives and contexts are unable to access these systems that exist in private venture capital. On our side, even if I don't show you impact, an ordinary intelligent voter should be able to tell rural innovators, women, more scope is more weight. We make much more sense within those instances. So the conversation on our side is not about who is more efficient. It's about how do we create optimization for possibilities for more people? Because we say inclusion creates that future efficiency, and that's why we want that. We expose more freedom, more creativity, and we build those systems. You see, they say we would eventually fail, because some of them do fail, according to the info slide. We call it collective learning, and that's why
All
we
right. Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Let's go.
All right. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
All right. My POI preference is just at any point interrupt me. I'm taking a few seconds to start my timer and catch my breath. All right. Panel, operating off the assumption that I'm still audible, I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I get into my argumentation proper, I want to make something very clear so that whatever Eziel is cooking coming from closing doesn't fly in today's debate. Understand that the debate cannot be about the excesses of venture capitalism. Yes, as a system, venture capitalism has allowed some bad things to happen. It does not mean the system itself is flawed, especially when we can look at some of the things it's created, but we don't want to make this debate about examples. Secondly, it would be unfair if that's where the debate came from, because venture communism is a hypothetical system, and we cannot practicalize any of its impacts in the negative sense because they haven't happened in status quo. Eziel cannot run any of the things he's trying to run into this debate. But moving on from that, let's talk a bit about the incentives of these venture capitalists and why necessarily they are nothing like what we get from opening government. Understand that, yes, it is true that these venture capitalists necessarily want to make a return on that profit, but the way they make a return on that profit is necessarily providing people the services they need, supply and demand. Understand that even though they are chasing profit, this does not necessarily mean they're always going to chase the thing that has been most profitable. Why? One, because of the way markets tend to be monopolized by people who enter the space early, and it's that early adoption that becomes the key thing in breaking the incentive deadlock in opening half, because to the point where these capitalists know that if they're able to corner a market early, then they're going to be able to milk it for the maximum amount of profit. What that means is that they're always incentivized to experiment and throw their financial net wide in hopes of capturing something that's going to make enough profit to offset the losses they gain in other areas. That's their business model. That's how they've always operated. We think that you cannot say that they're not going to necessarily invest in areas that people care about because particularly it generates less profit for them. So let's move on to the states and necessarily why they don't act in the way that opening government thinks they act in today's debate. We think that when it comes to the states, the biggest issue we have with them is accountability. We think that the issue with state accountability, as characterized by Griffith's speech, is not that it's non-existent, but that it's far weaker than the sort of accountability you get from a venture capitalist body, i.e. people who have massive amounts of money, people who have massive amounts of financial and political capital that can press your neck and demand results. Because accountability isn't just about knowing what's happening, it's about being able to own up to necessarily the consequences. We think that to the point where the state has no skin in the game, or at the very least less skin in the game than investors who have put in their own money, who have taken a financial risk, then necessarily that sort of accountability is far weaker in principle. But moving on to the specific mechanisms for accountability that we get, especially from Jonathan, we think that they are equally as weak, if not weaker. Because if we think his best argumentation is this idea that necessarily you having this sort of moral impetus goad within you, that you are contributing to the state in a meaningful way, therefore you become invested in the state. We think that if that existed in any meaningful capacity in the real world, then we wouldn't have crime, we wouldn't have tax evasion, we wouldn't have people always putting their self-interest first. We cannot leave big financial decisions into the hands of goodwill. Understand that we need to have enforceable legal restrictions in that area. before I take you, let me get into my extension from DPM before I rebuild my partner's case. Understand that what we do uniquely from side opening opposition is that we defend the entrepreneurial spirit, and we tell you that this is something that is very valuable in today's debate. Why? We think that to the point where you democratize funding in the way that venture communism seeks to do, necessarily what you do is you disincentivize people from engaging in this competitive nature, i.e., people are necessarily going to be giving half-baked ideas, are not going to be trying as hard because they know at the end of the day, the state is going to fund them and the state isn't really going to be pressing on their necks to get their money back. What this means necessarily is that what happens in the public psyche is that people then begin to view entrepreneurship as less of something valuable and more of something that they're entitled to because the state is just going to fund them. What this means necessarily, especially because the state has an even more limited capacity to fund these entities as opposed to these venture capitalists, which most of them have more money than a lot of the number of states that we exist in status quo, is that necessarily you are going to have less effective, less profitable, less desirable entrepreneurial people entering the mix. What this looks like necessarily is we are funding, as opposed to things like Facebook and M-Pesa, we are funding that foolish idea I had for a startup when I was 13 because necessarily the state can do it and the state will do it. We think this is uniquely bad because it turns people off of entrepreneurism. What this looks like necessarily is people deciding that they are going to try other things, i.e., I'm going to focus on my job. I'm going to necessarily not engage in this entrepreneurial business because at the end of the day, it's not something that's serious. It's necessarily something that the state will just do because they can, and I'm not going to generate the maximum amount of profit off of this. And we think that this is particularly bad because in status quo, we have seen how entrepreneurism done well has the ability to transform economies and change lives. See Rwanda, see South Korea, see necessarily places like Silicon Valley. Understand that entrepreneurism and venture capitalism done well has massive amounts of economic potential to affect the lives of everybody from the elites necessarily to the grounds workers in the massive facilities that are going to be built up to maintain the operations of these entrepreneurial ventures. Understand that we protect that best in my world, and you don't really get that impact in Gab's world. But let's look at another unique thing that exists in status quo that we think does a lot.
Our extension.
Let me take it now.
I think the problem with the opening half is that OG framed the debate terribly. In status quo, states massively invest those taxes in billionaires. Why do you think you should still invest it in billionaires and not the very people?
Hannah, understand that you saying states invest taxes in billionaires is something that you are going to have to prove through specific mechanisms that we can then engage. Because we think that state does invest, yes, but state invests in a wide range of entities that it has deemed valuable to them. And this was actually a perfect segue into the next point I'm making. We think that to the point where in status quo, i.e. capitalists, i.e. socialist democratic countries that exist, necessarily what states can and do is that if they determine a particular venture to be something so valuable to them, i.e. necessarily fixing irrigation systems in their most underprivileged communities, the states will and do invest in those areas or intervene directly. We think what this means necessarily is that you don't have to rely on systems of necessarily capitalist like growth if you have determined something to be so urgent that the state needs to intervene. We think that if state wants to do something so urgently, they will do it. No one has to stop them. They have specific and expedient mechanisms for it. We don't have to rely on the systems of venture communism in that sense. We think that at the end of the day, what you get from side opening opposition are the reasons why uniquely venture capitalism, although not the best system in the world, avoids a lot of the harms of venture communism as they would exist and necessarily has massive proven benefits when done well. We think if closing teams necessarily want to win this debate, then they have to first engage with the harms we propose and the benefits accordingly.
Thank you very much.
Whatever team I am.
Yeah, thank you very much, Diallo, for closing top half. Let's move on to the second half. Yeah, member of government.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, Super Nana, I get whatever you said. Give me a few seconds. I'm debating from a place of inconvenience. So let me just position myself, then we can start the debate proper. imprep sheet. Okay. I like to take closing opposition so that I can engage their extension as well. As usual, this is how I speak. It sounds lazy, but please track the speech so that you don't miss a lot of the important things. Yeah.
So please
Starting
start.
starting in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, this debate is not about innovation, private investment, or efficiency. It's about who has built the wealth and who must be repaid. Think across Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya, the state collects taxes, tariffs, and levies from ordinary citizens. These taxes are supposed to fund the infrastructure, services, and social programs. Yet, a large portion of the state resources is redirected to billionaires and too big to fail companies under the pretext that they would employ people and improve the lives of these citizens. Roads, electricity, ports, subsidies, and grants flow upwards to the elite, whilst ordinary citizens see minimal benefit. I think this is state capture because the wealthy have convinced the state that their success is synonymous to the public welfare, even when their records show the opposite. So in Nigeria, Dangote Industries and Dangote Group enjoy tax holidays and public incentives worth billions of naira. They promise jobs, but most rural and small-scale communities see little improvement in employment or economic opportunity. Mike Adenuga and other conglomerates receive similar privileges, yet their employment and promises remain unfulfilled outside major urban centers. Think in Ghana, exporters of cocoa and gold benefit from electricity subsidies, roads, favorable tax treatment, yet farmers and laborers continue to struggle with low incomes, minimal infrastructure, and poor access to markets. We think this is the system that up defense when they say that state already hands out grants. We think the state does not hand out resources, but those resources, the state hands out these resources, but those resources go overwhelmingly to billionaires and not citizens. We think the elites are treated as generous angels and their failures are tolerated because they are too big to fail and are presumed to serve the public. The reality is that they have failed massively, and most times employment targets are missed. Innovation is limited to high-end urban sectors, and wealth remains concentrated at the top. I think the pretext of public benefits has not materialized the majority. What do we then propose from closing government in the world that we prefer? It's very simple. We are defending a simple corrective tax. Take the resources that the state already invests in these billionaires and redirect them to the ordinary citizens, even if they are going to fail. Farmers, cooperative, young innovators should receive that grant directly so that they can build their enterprises, employ others, and innovate locally as compared to these big people promising them that they will employ them, but then operate under massive quotas that does not trickle to them. But most of them also keep most of their money in things like private equities and all those stuff outside the very states that create mechanism for them to enjoy. There's a massive capital flight that exists within most of these billionaires and nothing checks them. Due to this inequality that has been preaching on our side and why we proved it, I think the moral logic is very clear. When those who are supposed to deliver public value fail to do so, the state has an obligation to repair the harm, even if the grant they give to states does not immediately, they give to most of these citizens does not immediately succeed. We think just as reparations are sometimes paid to historically oppressed populations, even if individual settlements to immediately create wealth, public grants to citizens are justified as a restitution for systemic extraction of their own taxes given to billionaires to create better systems for them, but these people constantly fail. We think it was theft, and the only way you are able to reparate theft is that you give these people the capacity to control their lives in ways that they would have used that money that was stolen to them to give to these billionaires. Why do we win this debate? Because it shows you that even if these people are not efficient, and if all the pragmatic considerations within this debate is a wash, our principle wins directly because this is massively reparatory on our side of the house. But let's have the reparatory debate. Shoot your POI.
So we
So
think that if states necessarily want to like reparate people, then why are they doing it through the same systems of capitalism that are oppressing them in the first place? Give them
You are
welfare, or at best give them community.
you are not making sense. State is giving them the capacity for them to start their own businesses, to control their lives. That is literally something that sustains them within that side. We can't have a debate about, well, state should give them the money or state should continuously pay them. It is when they use that money to build machinery of the state, that's when the state continuously is able to tax them, to now give them their tax to be better people within that side. This is simple logic. Like, I don't know what you get on your side, but the comparative on your side is worse. You are saying these people are terrible. The same people that pay the taxes, they don't have capacity, they don't have sense, all those other stuff. So they are going to fail. So you need to steal from them and go and give it to billionaires. And the billionaires are the ones that have sense to be able to like build better systems to protect them. But these people have never been able to build better systems to protect them anyways. And that's why your comparative is out of the debate. Second extension on that side of the house, because the first extension outrightly wins on the principle. Second extension on social impact and minorities. I think most of the pressing problems faced by women, rural communities, and poor citizens can be solved through innovative startups. So things like access to clean water, small scale irrigation, affordable childcare, and all those other stuff. Yet most of these private ventures rarely invest in this area. First of all, such ventures are not scalable to billions in profit, which means that it makes it unappealing for most of these people. But secondly, these projects are often politically sensitive. So entrepreneurs who address structural inequality, women rights, or labor abuses most times risk backlash and all those stuff. And so most of these private equities that necessarily want short-term profit do not prioritize these things. But lastly, notice that private equity firms, through rigorous inspection and risk control, ensure that funding only goes to ventures that are politically palatable and not socially necessary. This creates a structural gap that exists because the very innovations that could meaningfully improve the lives of the marginalized population are systemically ignored. Insofar as that social contract is broken, then the state has the and the state has the resources to fill this gap. We think that the state then has a responsibility to fill this gap. But here is why we beat opening government. Because opening government says that InfoSlide says they have a risk of failing. Even if they fail, they are able to learn from it. We say no, because we think that failure in of itself is a process. When you start a startup, it's not just that when you start now, then you are going to fail. You are going to benefit people for some time. But most times, startups fail because after 4 to 5 years, they are not able to break even to get profits that's able to massively sustain them. We think that even during that process, we are able to provide social amenities and essential services to a lot of people. So if we start a water irrigation service and it collapses after 5 years, we've still been able to benefit a lot of people structurally that have been
Thank you very
neglected
much.
by most of these billionaires. We think that is something that is better on our side of the house.
Okay, thank you very much, Member of Government, Member of Op.
All right, guys, am I audible?
Yeah, you're very audible.
All right, thank you so much. So I tried my best to call for POI, even though easier, you promised to take us, you didn't. And I also tried to engage OG, so you don't blame me for whatever I have to do in this speech, which might not be consistent with their material. I try to engage that. But I will still try not to deviate so much so that the deliberation could be smooth for the panel. Just flagging this out, it's important teams take POI. All right, so I'll be starting my speech shortly. Yeah, I might take POI within my speech, but if I don't, my partner will definitely take it. It's nothing personal. Okay, so starting my speech right about now. I think the debate from closing half to a very large extent is proximate to what the debate necessarily needs, which is on both sides of the house, there has been a narrative with state investment and private cooperation investment. But with what's easier pointed out, it's oh, it's all about justice for the common people. I will flip that to show you what is most likely bad with that sort of like analysis it gave to you. But different from what you had from opening opposition, I think it's important for us to characterize what influenced state actions to a very large extent. It's not just about you want to fight for the poor. If you want to fight for the poor, you can as well tell the billionaires to bring down the premium they place on their services, which directly makes life to be harder for individuals. You can as well tell them to make market competition quite easier for the common people who don't have the capital to compete in those specific markets. So it's not about we don't want to fund billionaires anymore. Let's just start funding the common people. We don't think you're able to take away all those other structural problems that does not allow people to benefit from state investment. Your impact are not definitely giving any sort of like sustainable solution. Two things influence government policy. The first is that government would always prioritize ideas and innovations that directly support or favor their administration, almost especially their policy statements. While capitalists, to a very large extent, have policy statements too. But there are many capitalists that you can definitely choose from. But the reason why this optionality is better as compared to state monolithic action is that capitalists are always capitalists create their visions based on things like visionary projection. What would the world look like in the next 30 years? What would the world look like in the next 50 years? They project these things and then they intentionally invest funds to ensure the survivability of their businesses at that particular point in time. Two things like, number one, safe, secured risk factor for things like assurance on their investment, on their businesses as well. That's why most capitalist ventures always ensure things like opening and setting up of trust funds for their businesses. One, because they don't want their families to squander it. Two, they don't want those investments to also be susceptible to governmental irrational policies, things like inflation and all that. But also three, they want to ensure the ability for whatever shortfall that happen to their businesses to be flexible. So you can easily pull money from those specific trust funds and your business continue. Comparatively with government idea and government innovation, not only because it is limited in scope, but also because it does not have quick fallback plan. There are three quick fallback plans on their side of the house when government investments fail. The first is bailout. Calm down. The first is bailout. The second is loan, and most likely national reserve. Why are these mechanisms bad? Most likely bad for them. The first, all of those particular mechanisms comes with policy that directly influence their internal economic policies. Things like structural adjustment program did not just find its way into Nigeria, Ghana, and every other places. They came as a resultant effect of African government always taking loans to bail themselves out of shitty economic situation in order for them to access those specific loans. It means on a marginal level of what if both worlds fails, it is better for us to most likely take on with the capitalistic venture, because not only does it have dependable and reliable structural recovery plan, but it also address things like visionary projection within those specific regards. Direct engagement to closing government. They said it's all about investments direct to billionaires. I wanted to ask a very simple POI. Do these private companies also make investments on their own? Of course, they didn't give that option. So probably Super Nana will respond to it. But this is a positive material on this particular question. We think that the reason why private ventures capitalism is very, very much more better is that they don't just use political optics or government idea to scout for startups to invest in. They specifically look out for startups that are channeled towards their visionary projection. So even if opening government says they are political, it's not politics, because they neither belong to the left or the right. They belong to what the future most likely needs. And that is why you're able to see a lot of startups, both in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya, as the case may be, tailoring their innovation, tailoring the diversity of their businesses towards those specific future, because they know that that is what these specific billionaires intentionally want to invest in. Why that is comparatively better is that it opens up the space for individuals to dream beyond the limitation that is most likely capped by their government. Because government don't just give you money because they sympathize with the fact that billionaires have been the one taking the money, like CG's extension. Government gives you money based on your ability to be loyal to party ideals and the ability for you to most likely be consistent with whatever deals they most likely have to give to you. Capitalists are always demanded are always dependent on things like result orientation and the ability for the nature of your businesses to be consistent with what they need on the long-term measure. two reasons why you should buy this. Number one is that it brings better return to those specific funds, not only because it may not fail, but because the probability of it failing does not come by some irrational political movement or policies that comes from government. It's probably based on market structural adjustments and every other things that is needed for expansion. But also too, because it allows for much more thriving innovation that driving things like employment skills. So you have 30 startups which is able to employ as much as thousands of people. What you should.
So the highlight of the info slide for government ends at the idea being viable. Once you extend it to government being biased on political lines, there's no leverage to argue from government.
Bro, I'm not like opening opposition. I'm not telling you government is slow, government may not be nice. I think my framing is simple. But if you're talking about government, it's always political dictate. But let's even kill that out of the way. My second extension should be out of the debate. How do you respond in a situation where there is shortfall? The same info side tells you that it may fail, but I'm not even banking on when it would fail. We are looking at everything holistically. The last extension from closing opposition, which nobody have necessarily looked at in this specific debate, is what is the most important thing that should get to the common people? Because closing government talks about that. You see, every startup's investment that capitalists make always come with conditionality for you to include things like women, minorities within your working capital. Why? Because they want to protect that reputation within the global space. Government don't have incentive to do that, most especially when you have a conservative government or a women bias sort of like government within those regard. It means minorities are better protected on our side of the house. Go and check the statistics for CEOs, head of operations of different startups that are largely backed up by capitalists. They include women within those specific spaces because that action in itself continually projects and protects the ability for their investors to not pull out resources from those specific companies. I think this is something that benefits all actors, and to this end, we are proud to uphold.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, member of opposition. Let's have the government rep.
Hi guys, I'm audible. Can you hear me? Hi. You guys?
Sorry, I thought I responded. Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, cool. Hi everyone, look at my username. It says visit Vacations Pass. Be sure to give the website a check out. I built that shit and it's good for the debates community. So Easiel, I'm looking at
if
your
it's
DMs.
Shit, why should we visit shit, man?
No, it's some good shit actually. Like it's really fantastic shit. If you have ideas, you can hit me up after this round and then we can build the site to make it better. Great. Okay. Cool. All right, cool. POS in the chat space. I'm looking at that. All right. Sorry for the delays. I was just like getting responses because this is going to be an interesting whip speech. I start the debate in 3, 2, 1. Closing the position is actually repackaging OO's cases. That is cases that are very shallow and not very comparative because they tell you, number one, that look, capitalists have very good fallback plans. And on our side of the world, when we waste a shit ton of the money, our fallback plans are going to be very terrible. Like we would go to the IMF for loans, and that means that IMF would give us structural adjustments programs, and that would hurt a lot of the people. But a quick reality check. CEO is defending status quo when Nigeria and Ghana are already under these structural adjustment programs because they keep on funding the private venture capitalistic model that have been failing, like Ezeal told you. That means the very harms in status quo he identifies are harms that have been caused by the structure he's supposed to defend. That means that the very best case, like reality check defeats them. But then secondly, we think that we are going to have much better incentives to make sure that when the state is allocating these resources now, they can now claim they have full control over these things, so they cannot make excuses to the people to say say that, oh, the economy collapsed because the billionaires that we bet on weren't smart enough. Those excuses they give in status quo is something you take away from them because they can no longer weaponize it, because the state is the one now that is one funding these venture capitalistic like ventures. That means then that they have to make sure that they have something to account to the people on every 4 years when you're going for election cycles. CO doesn't really have that much of a response. Like, it was all yada yada about like fallback mechanisms. It really does nothing to defend their stance. The other thing they then say is to co-opt India's idea about how this is going to be good for minorities. And they say, well, if you look on the board panel of a lot of these private firms, they have like quotas for women and they have a quota for minorities, because the reason is they want to report to the international community that they are also very progressive. Number one, I would note that these quotas are very performative. That is why they are more likely to create like very useless positions in the HR and say, HR, sub-HR, 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 where these women are there and they never really do anything. On our side of the house, you don't give the money to patriarchal billionaires, you give the money to the women that will directly come to you from their community and pitch the idea to you. So it becomes a woman-owned business. It's much better that way because they don't have to give like tokenistic quotas to women in that particular regard. It's much better. Even if you have like 4 or 5 quotas in CO's world, comparatively, CG is way better than that, and we beat them. But then also there is an argument that CO recycles from OO. That is to say that government that like really doesn't have good policy directions. So oftentimes you need these capitalistic guys to guide them, or the economy will probably suffer. I don't think this is true. Number one, this assumes that number one, governments are very stupid. I don't think like this is true insofar as on their side of the world, they believe that the government is good and smart to make sure that they can give the money to good, smart billionaires. If the government is stupid on both sides, it means the money that they give in CO is going to stupid billionaires too. Like, you can't win a debate by saying governments are terrible and you can never do anything. But the argument here is to say that, look, even if governments weren't so effective, when we implement the model of communism by the state, by funding these things, it means then that they know they are going to have political incentives because it's going to be on very social issues. And these things are very sensitive. Most of these people are single voter issues. They are going to know what are you doing about the water crisis because they know that people had startup ideas. Why haven't you funded them? Why are you only giving the money to people in Lagos and Abuja and Accra? What about people in Kano? What about people in like Winneba? As long as you cannot answer these questions, these political parties are going to lose power. That means they have incentives to make sure that the funding is more diverse and is spread across. That means you get the diversity, and on flip, it defeats OO and CO because the money isn't held up in like Dangote and all of those flashy billionaires that only align with political parties. We beat OO and we beat CO in that regard. Let's respond to OO then. OO tells you something very simplistic because they say that over time, this is going to normalize mediocrity. I don't think this is true. In fact, I would want to flip it. Look, the status quo problem is that there is lack of participation and inclusivity. The truth is, even if you have a viable idea as a university student, before you can get funding from these billionaires on how to get some capital to run your startup, you have to go through a shit ton of loopholes. They will check your LinkedIn. They will want to know if any billionaire knows you, because if they helping you is contingent on what you can do for them in the future, because they are not your government. They don't have a responsibility towards you. They see it as doing you a favor with your brilliant startup idea. That's why the DLO's idea when he was 13 years old was never funded, because they think you are some shitty teenager from somewhere and they don't know you. The flip is, on our side, you can go to your DCE, you can go to your assemblyman, you can go to your MP with your mom, your dad, you pitch the idea. They have a contractual obligation to hear you out. As long as the idea is viable, they have to do it. They won't check your LinkedIn connections. That means entrepreneurship gets more accessible and it becomes more viable. The idea is we don't water it down. Panel notes, I agree, we are going to get a lot of stupid ideas. Lots of people would come to us with stupid ideas, but that's what government is there for. Government's job is to sit down and listen to stupid ideas and put them to the side. That means the more stupid ideas we receive, the more stupid ideas we put in the trash can. We are going to only implement the viable ones. We don't say you can water down entrepreneurship. The other silly thing OO then tells you is to say, well, look, we think that even if this is going to be true, right? We think at the end of the day, accountability is weak and non-existent. I think like the political incentives I give you as to why this communism would be done better is something that defeats everything that you hear from them. At this point, I'll take a POI from opening opposition. Shoot, let's go.
So, if you think it's unjust for state to subsidize billionaires, why are you replicating the same mistake with everyone suddenly? Because of course, state will still need to subsidize these companies to ensure their growth.
Yeah, fantastic. Because you stole the money from the poor people. Panel, listen to this response. In most developing countries, the tax nets only stifles the poor the most because they pay indirect taxes, they pay market tolls, they pay the brunt of fuel taxes. While the rich and the political classes have fuel coupons, they have tax holidays, their monies are not taxed. That means most of Ghana's tax revenue is coming from the middle class and the lower class, and you give this shit to McDan and these billionaires who will then like repatriate the profits abroad, like Israel tells you. That means it's been a constant cycle of injustices
1957, they became independent. The only way to correct this is to make sure that you're also now taking the tax money they've already paid you and giving it back to them. We are not robbing Peter to pay Paul. We are taking the money that Peter already gave us to give it to the same fucking Peter that we've been stamping on for about 50 years to 6 decades. That is why there is a moral justification. On the way up against the bench, then, why are we beating OG? Because to be fair, OG did say something about the failure, right? Because they said when they lose, it's okay because it's a learning curve. We don't think it's enough to simply say it's okay, given that these OO and CO guys are saying, losing means failure means you're wasting money. That's why like CEO can say all of that IMF things they want to say. We think that that failure number one is justified on the idea that these particular guys are the ones that gave you the money in the first place. But then number two, you are helping minorities at the point in time where the business is going to exist for 5 to 10 years. But the reason why we are beating OG is because we have a better argument about self-sustainability. We don't just assume like everything of Ben say, we can't regulate enough, we might fail, we might not fail. We say that it's going to make sure that these poorer nations themselves can uplift themselves out of poverty. How? Number one, the system is going to grow the tax base over time. How does this work? Because you know that the citizens are going to be funded. Even if they partially succeed, they are going to hire workers, they are going to sell goods, they are going to generate VAT income and business taxes. That means the money stays within the economy. But then also number two, you're going to diversify
thank you very
the
much.
goods. You want to do things like
Government whip.
agricultural and rural
Thank
urban
you, thank you,
support.
thank you,
Vote
thank you,
CG.
thank you.
It's been a good day to win.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Government whip. Let's have the closing whip to close the debate here. Griffith, you can put your hand down. The speaker is done.
I just want to ask if UpRep will take us from CG.
Yes, Ezel, I'll take you from CG. Yeah,
Jackie, can you please be a bit more audible?
Zoom has this problem of repressing my voice. Okay, I'm coming. So how about now?
Yeah, you're now very audible.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay, TSM, I saw that.
Okay, cool.
I saw that. Okay. Yeah, in the spirit of supporting Nana, please, all the things he said about vacation spa are viable. They're not shit. Franco, yeah, if there are any ideas you have, please send it to the website. They would be of help. Okay.
Sorry. He actually was the one who said we should go and visit that shit. And I was clarifying if it's shit, why should we visit? That's what I said. So.
Don't mind him.
All right.
Okay. Also, so I'm going to, if you have a POI, just unmute and ask. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This will be the best whip speech in this room because it's going to help you process my partner's speech and make you see it's a winning extension, right? First, the very first thing my partner's extension points out to you is that there is an uncertainty as to how you get funds from government, and there is a certainty as to how you get funds from the capitalists, right, to the hedge funds and trust funds. Pay attention to the analysis, right? The scope of falling back to loans and bailouts, right, and all this analysis on the IMF and those particular things. If you understand that reality, it paints one thing, that government to a large extent, to a very large extent, relies on loans to build critical infrastructures, to be able to build more research and finance more things in education and sort of things, meaning that everything you need tax to do, right, you still need loan to support that. What does that tell you? That tells you that it is always rare to have benchmarks on taxes. So even if they exist, it is rare. So on a scalability of how certain you're going to get funds from the benchmarks of tax, it might not happen, right? And it might happen because government needs loans to support the already existing tax for internal infrastructure and all those sort of things. Then my partner's extension makes more sense and as to how it wins this room. Because if benchmarks are rare, right? And if Nana agrees that we are describing status quo, that government relies on loans and all these particular things already, which is true, because no matter how developed you are as a government, you're still going to rely on loans. And these loans are bonuses to taxes, right? It means benchmarks would be rare, right? It would be rare for you to have a benchmarks over a particular tax, meaning the extent to which it is certain that you're going to fund is also lessened. The impact of this in this room is of two ways. First, I think this is the first time a government team is interrogating the idea of the benchmark and how it happens, right? That good response came from us. That's put us in a better positionality to be better than OO. Because it engages, calm down, because it engages OG's framing, which OO actually missed, right? I think this framework from us engaged the value as to how that benchmark existed and as to how the quality of that sustenance can happen comparatively to our world, because not accuse us of not being comparative. We were fucking comparative in the extension. Comparative in our world, right? Edge up funds and trust funds are things that are very sustainable, especially when it comes to board of directors and comes to certain, publicly traded companies, which are to a large extent still capitalists, because they need all these sort of things to be able to edge up their reputation. This means that even if they fail, they could still, continue certain things because they have that fallback plan that can always exist. But then the comparison is very simple. You could always pitch your idea to capitalists, because even if one capitalist is unable to fund you, there are tons of capitalists you could pitch your idea to. There are only one government, right? So that choice is limited, and that only one government that exists to a large extent have rare benchmark, right? So it is still very fucked up in their world, and then it begins to make sense why CEO is going to win this room. The second impact of that extension in this debate is on, the rural arguments coming from CG, that governments, to a large extent, don't prioritize rural areas, they prioritize mega cities, right? They would still prioritize mega cities, because even if in the extent of why that benchmark exists, so even when those benchmarks exist and they give those funds, because funds are limited, right? Like I already explained to you, and from the extension coming from my partner, governments would be forced to prioritize mega cities for two reasons. One, governments are run by administrations. So the Republican would be forced to prioritize blue states because they know that their legitimacy and more votes would come from there. So you would want to prioritize viable ideas from Republican states which exist within this particular regard. And secondly, mega cities exist within the trench of publicity and entrenchment. So governments are more likely to prioritize this sort of thing because of the rarity of funds, right? The second thing, comparatively, is that, like my partner told you, capitalists care about monopoly. Secondly, capitalists care about how sustainable a business idea can be over the years in a way that helps the future. This means capitalists are more incentivized to fund a rural idea because they know when it succeeds, they can have a monopoly over that particular region, which makes their business successful. Meaning capitalists are likely to do these things than governments who could, who could want to prioritize these things. OG, shoot.
If there is no concession from up on having a neutral government, there is no leverage for any team to achieve any utility in government.
No, you can't claim you would have a neutral government and then claim you won't have a neutral capitalist. You can't debate like that. If you say, shut up. If you say that we want a neutral government, we can also say we want a neutral capitalist who wouldn't prognose in your business and sort of things. You can't just debate like that. So let me segue into the representation, right? Notice, like I already told you, right? Like my partner already said in the second extension, if you have a conservative government, what determines what is a viable idea is dependent on the policy statement of that administration. So if you're a Republican, your viable ideas would be right ideologies. If you're, a leftist government, your viable idea would be leftist. The comparison is simple. Even when capitalists also have policy statements, the question is there are tons of capitalists you could choose from. How does this impact the debate? First, it impacts minority representation and all reparation argument that CG was running. Because it means if your idea does not fit into certain policy statement that comes from a particular administration, it's not viable. Because viability is still policy defined, right? Essentially. Because even if that exists in our world, there are a lot of capitalists you could choose from. So if one rejects you, you could go to the next and pitch your idea. But if government rejects you, there is only one government. There are no choice. Meaning, reparation is impugned if there are stringent means of access. That's why the second extension coming from my partner's speech also wins the debate. Ultimately, the reason CEO wins the debate on all facets of this debate means that our argument is more in tune into the reality of policy statements and into the reality of investment. And now the capitalist nature can then tends to be monopolistic, still entrench into more rural areas that diversify minority representation.
All
Which
right.
government affords
Thank you
someone like
very
me,
much.
students, very proud to vote.
Yeah, thank you very much, Closing Way, for the fine speech. Thank you very much, guys. It was a good debate. It's an open round, so I'm glad to be back in 15 minutes to give an OA. I enjoyed the debate. Good debate, guys. I'll be back with my.
Oh, I thought it was a blind round, Franco.
Well, that's up to you.